Okay, everybody, I'm back with part 2 of my reading of Dan Drazen's review of 237. As I ended the first part, he scored the head category of the story, the head part of the story. He gave it a score of 5. Now we look at the I/artistic category and see what he gives it there. And I quote, "Stephen Butler's artwork only gets a chance to breathe during the Sally sequences in the beginning and for the cliffhanger end. Once it gets deeper into the story, the artwork becomes nearly as impenetrable as the jungle. It's good, I'm not saying that it isn't, but it's packed awfully tight in there. I/artistic score 7 for the I artistic category. Now we get into the heart category. And I quote, this is his thoughts on the heart of the story. "Effectively, there is no real heart moment here. Not even when Luke's daughter tells Amy Rose that her mother is missing. The fact that it doesn't work tells you what kind of heart poison exploitation can be. Maybe they'll figure it out in time for the conclusion. Heart score, or score for the heart category, not available." So right now, as I mentioned in part 1 of this review, in the first video, apparently, the 30 score that, let's say, Ian Flynn would be looking for from someone like Dan Drazen is only amounted to a 12. That's right. 12 out of 30 for the main story. In other words, think of the 10 as an A+, but think of 12 as probably being like an F, if you know what I mean. Alright, now we get the backstory. Heart to heart. And this is what he says about the backstory, and I quote, let me get some coffee here first. That's better. But this is what he says about the backstory, and I quote, this is his review on it, very short. "Nicole has and I quote, Nicole has company in the form of Mina, whatever you want to call her. But given the treatment she's received lately, including exile to this location, she prefers to text Mina, and with lines such as, quote-unquote, 'you got just what you wanted,' and, quote-unquote, 'I failed my friends,' she gets the point across. Mina, for her part, thinks that the conversation is primarily about herself. This is reinforced with dialogue such as, quote-unquote, 'this isn't what I wanted,' and, quote-unquote, 'I got it so wrong,' and, quote-unquote, 'I failed as a freedom fighter.' Eventually, Nicole reases, or appears, so they could have an actual conversation, unfocused though it may be. And just on the verge of happy ending for the story, who butts in at the last moment? You know the answer to that one. But yeah, that's basically his little review on the backstory of Heart to Heart. And now he's going to score it. Again, remember, all 10s equals a 30-point score. No 10s, less than that, less than 30, well, you'll have to see. And if all together, well, we'll get to that and when we get to it. But this is what he said. This is his scoring for the head part, for the head category of the backstory. This is what he says. This is his score for the head category. And this is what he says about the head, for the head category of the story. Or the backstory, that is. And I quote, "It may be some kind of rule, but it seems to me that the fewer characters a story has, the more potential for being a cut above the norm." Okay. It may be some kind of rule, but it seems to me that the fewer characters, okay, I'm sorry. Blech. Let me start over. It says, and I quote, "It may be some kind of rule, but it seems to me that the fewer characters a story has, the more potential for being a cut above the norm." I'd have to go back and research that, but just comparing the two stories in this issue, it seems to hold up. The plot itself is simple enough. Mina apologizes for turning the populace against Nicole at her concert back in issue 221. I know the results of her art, enhanced and amplified by Nagas, are available for all to see. The Royals broken up, Antoine out of the picture, Bunny in exile, and Nagas in his mental cabinet, large and in charge. Still, there's a certain abrupt feeling to Mina's apology, because we didn't get to see her put two and two together and come up with quote-unquote oops. So her confession and repentance just look too obliviatory. I can't pronounce that word. I'll provide a link below in both videos so you can read it yourself if I mispronounce anything. Continuing on, and I quote, "It wouldn't have killed Ian to put her in one panel in an earlier story asking herself, quote unquote, what have I done? It would have gone a long way towards teeing up, capitalize, this story. The only other character of importance is Nicole, and she plays it well, but how she plays it is best left to the heart section. That just leaves us a last moment appearance by Harvey Hu. As I believe I made clear, whenever he pulls this sort of thing, the more I see of him, the more I distrust him. His showing up where and when he does is way too easy. In this case, he would have had to be either stalking Mina, or else he thinks that hanging with a traumatized AI is a good time. It's just too simple, too convenient, and as a result, too suspicious. If the floor is still open for nominations for traitor, you know who's getting my vote. Head score for the head category of the story, 5. I score, artistic score for the backstory. One thing I can count on with Tracy Yardlin is dynamic layouts that generally are in sync with the action of the story. For whatever reason, things are in a jumble here, especially for the second and third pages. Granted, there's a huge difference between a character who can show emotion and a static vid screen with text on it. But until Nicole shows herself, it just feels weird. Of course, Mina's dialogue is so complex that it does serve to limit Tracy's options. Finally, there's the art at the top of the last page. It just seems too self-congratulatory for a scene of reconciliation and forgiveness. Nicole's expression in the third panel is all wrong for the moment. She looks like she just heard a really great joke. The moment when she talks about developing emotion demands more of a data-esque laboratory. The art is good, but in several respects it's also raw. Art score for the artistic eye category, 6. Now we get into the heart category and where he scores it. And this is what he says about the heart category, and I quote, of the backstory, and I quote, "This story works better if you cut past the obvious and get in touch with the subtext. There's a lot of heart in this story, even though it's as closely held as a prisoner at Guanamatano. I can't even pronounce it. I know the name of it. Guanamatano. Ian gets off a good opening shot with Mina's self-talk, quote-unquote, okay, you can do this, you can do this. Not only does it speak to the timing and why it's taken this long for Mina to get to, quote-unquote, oops, but also speaks to Mina's own feelings about having to back down from her previous stance, as well as to confront the person, yes, I know there's probably a difference of opinion about that, whom she's hurt. Anyone who's worked the 9th step of the 12 made direct amends to people wherever possible, except to do so would injure them or others would understand. Here is one instance where the story structure and the unrelenting use of exploitation actually work for the heart factor. It's not enough for Mina to just show up and say, quote-unquote, sorry. She ends up explaining herself to Nicole and the readers. Of course, Mina's repentance isn't exactly complete. On the final page, she admits to working on new material and, quote-unquote, I'm going to get the message right this time. With Nagas capable of swaying the popular mood the way he did the first time, I can only say, quote-unquote, good luck with that. Speaking of Nagas, I believe we've come to the point in the narrative where he's decided that he's not letting Eggman have all the jollies. As a result, I wouldn't be surprised if he sees to it that Mina disappears if she tries to revisit her message. Tactically, he's had to refrain from taking out his enemies. That could change. Still, this story has some serious heart in spite of itself. Even when the plotting and or the artwork work against it. Or the art works against it. It finally succumbs to its forced ending when Ian throws away whatever emotional development he's managed to generate so he can get back to the plot. Heart score 7. So basically, for the backstory, out of a overall score of 30, he's given this 18 out of 30. And overall, it's a 30 out of 60 when you combine both stories together. Now, he does talk about some of these, little subcategories that we get in the back, like the Sonic Spin panel, the fan art section, the fan funnies, the off panel, the fan mail. But then he takes an opportunity to talk about something we've all been talking about through video or text. And this is what he says about the recent unveiling a few weeks ago at New York Comic Con. And I quote, this is what he says. I'd like to take this opportunity to point out, although this comic still has a long way to go until Sonic 250, Archie put profit ahead. Ever other consideration, Asian. And at this year's New York Comic Con, they debuted Sally's new, very much de-roboticized look. I suppose I always knew that Ian would pull her out of it in some cynical corner of my soul, but they went ahead and trashed about a year's worth of development on their own. And people wonder why the medium isn't taken seriously. Again, I'll provide a link down below so you guys can read this yourself. But yeah, basically overall he just gave a little bit of his thoughts as to the unveiling, and basically feels that they've just thrown away a whole year of story and development down the drains with the unveiling, but also overall gives the entire issue, both stories combined, a 30 out of 60. 12 out of 30 for the main, 18 out of 30 for the back. So that's all for my reading of Dan Drazen's review of Sonic issue 237. Comment down below. Tell me what you guys think. Comments and video responses are greatly welcome. Let me know if you agree with any of his thoughts on the categories and what he felt about the stories. And that's all I'm going to say. And take care and God bless.